welcome everybody. What a nice, wonderful crowd we have tonight, and that's thank you for coming out. Cozy. Cozy. It's a nice, cozy crowd. That's exactly right. So today we're going to do part 2. Last month, well actually 2 months ago, we talked about nutrient and neurotransmitter deficiencies, and I'll review briefly what we talked about so we get back up to speed. And today we're going to talk about really the stress vitamins, the B vitamins, the magnesium, and some of the things that we tend to need more and more in today's crazy world. I guess that's how you could call it. Okay, here we go. So remember, foundational principles is that the ability to measure is the foundation of all science. So what we do in functional medicine, we test. If you don't test, you've guessed. This is my professor, Dr. Gant, and that's his famous saying. And then the other foundational principle in functional medicine is the 10-tack theory of Dr. Hyman. And what this basically says is if you step on a bunch of tacks down here, you don't just take 1 or 2 out and give the patient some aspirin and say you'll be fine. And yet that is what we tend to do in most traditional practices because we're limited, it's short, quick visits, and we have to rush. So we sort of take out the most offending tack and we say, we'll see you later, you know. So let me see. Okay, yeah. So anyway, so the 10-tack theory says you have to remove all the tacks. You can take aspirin in the meantime, but let's get all the tacks out and figure out what's going on. And these tacks are the 7 hidden stresses that we'll go over in a minute. And the other foundational principle of functional medicine is we use functional markers. So for example, instead of measuring, I'll show you on the next slide, this is homocysteine, and I've simplified the slide. You see it's a very complicated set of reactions here, what we call methylation, we're going to learn about that, and sulfuration. So but this is the more simplified version that we're going to talk about. And what it says is that homocysteine is an intermediate compound. So this is a toxic amino acid that the body makes from protein you take in your diet. Now, if you have B12 and folic acid and methyl groups, which is a carbon and 3 hydrogen atoms together, then homocysteine will be converted into SAMe, which is a natural antidepressant. If you do not have enough B12 or folic acid or methyl groups around, then the homocysteine level starts to go up. So this is a functional marker. So instead of measuring a level of B12 in the blood, because B12 in the blood is notoriously unreliable. Why? Because if you eat something with a lot of B12 in it, the body will make sure that the B12 in the blood stays in a narrow range for a long time, and yet the cells may not be getting enough B12. So when we use homocysteine as a functional marker, this reaction goes on in trillions of cells in the body. So we know if your homocysteine level is high, your cells do not have enough B12 or folic acid. Or if you look on this side, B6. So vitamin B6 or pyridoxine is necessary to convert homocysteine into glutathione. And what's glutathione? It's better than vitamin C, it's better than vitamin E, it's better than any antioxidant you could possibly eat in the diet. I'll tell you why, because glutathione is your body's major, we call it an endogenous. It means it's formed inside the body itself, antioxidant, and it's an enzyme. So I'll give you an example. Another endogenous antioxidant enzyme is superoxide dismutase, SOD. Your SOD neutralizes about 1 million free radicals a second. When you take vitamin C, 1 molecule of vitamin C neutralizes 1 free radical. So we need antioxidants from our food for sure, but even more importantly, we need these endogenous antioxidants. We need our body to produce plenty of glutathione, and if you remember from our detoxification talk, glutathione is also a detoxifier. So people who have heavy metal problems or mercury or lead or cadmium, glutathione has to bind to that heavy metal to make it water soluble so it goes out in the stool and out in the kidneys. So the reason functional markers are so important is because blood doesn't really tell the story of what's going on inside each cell, but functional markers do. Does that make sense? Go ahead.
Question. If you have high homocysteine, do you know if it's B12 or B6? Do you know?
You don't know just from homocysteine. Then you have to do further testing, like methylmalonic acid is another functional marker, and if that's also high, we know that you're low in B12. And sometimes we just, like most of the time, just to be on the safe side, we give all. We give all of them. We give, like Cardio B that we use, or MethylGuard Plus, it has B6, B12, folic acid, and methyl groups. And we'll learn more about why, because it's such an important reaction, because these two things are the most, when you think you've got a natural antidepressant, SAMe, that helps brains function well, helps keep us happy and healthy, and a natural glutathione antioxidant that beats any orange juice, vitamin C, multivitamin pill in the world, you want to make sure you have plenty of B6, B12, folic acid to keep those antioxidants working well. So we just do the shotgun approach. Now, these 7 hidden stresses, remember, these are the tacks. These are the tacks that get stuck under your foot. And what are they? Hormone imbalance. So, for example, thyroid problems, adrenal problems, testosterone, estrogen, all these hormones can be a tack in the foot. If they are imbalanced, we've got to remove that tack by balancing the hormones. Inflammation. And you'll notice I made up this mnemonic. So the H is hormone. The I up here is inflammation. The D is digestive disorders. By the way, this is how I got through medical school. I'd make up mnemonics in my head for everything so I could remember these complicated things. And so this comes pretty easy to me. Inflammation is tack number 2. And remember, we had a whole talk on omega-3 fatty acids and how they're anti-inflammatory, and the corn and safflower oil are pro-inflammatory, and how we have to keep our inflammation levels low. Digestive disorders. Do you remember when we talked about digestive disorders, we talked about stress, gluten sensitivities. We talked about how the gut can create caseomorphins or gluteomorphins that go to the brain and make it act drunk, like delirious. So it's very important. If inflammation is going on in the gut, it can travel anywhere in the body, go to the brain, so we have to make sure we have plenty of good probiotics, eat the yogurts and the fermented foods, and keep our gut healthy. Detoxification issues, that's another tack in the foot. We talked about mercury and heavy metals. And then energy crises. I don't know if you remember our talk on the mitochondria. Inside each cell is that little energy, the battery of each cell, and all the nutrients that it needs to keep the cell functioning well, and how when the mitochondria fail, whichever cells they fail in leads to that disease. So, for example, in Parkinson's disease, in a part of the brain called the substantia nigra, if the mitochondria start to wear out in that part of the brain, you end up with Parkinson's. If the mitochondria wear out in the spinal cord and it can't make the myelin sheath, you could end up with MS. So the batteries, wherever the batteries die, whatever cells they were energizing, that's the disease you get. So do you see how just naming a disease isn't helpful? We have to find out why, what's going on that's causing the problem. And remember, excuse me, that the mitochondria, because that's where ATP is created, the energy of the body, that it's also free radicals are a byproduct of that process. It's like a metabolic exhaust. And if you remember, we talked about, so the mitochondria that create the energy are most susceptible to damage. It's like turning on the car in a garage. You better have something that sucks the fumes out. That's why antioxidants like glutathione and SOD are heavily present inside the mitochondria to chew up those free radicals, that exhaust, so that the mitochondria, in producing energy, doesn't burn itself out. So it's a delicate balance. And now we're on nutritional tack number 6, and then next month we're going to talk about my favorite subject, stress, because it's everywhere. And I've already prepared most of that talk, and it's going to be wonderful. So make sure you're here. And that's my area, the mind-body thing. I love that the most. We'll talk about placebos and how they work and how your mind can create healthy bodily chemistry changes, or it can create damaging changes just by the power of your thoughts. You know, we have stories of people who had severe allergic reactions to roses, but they didn't know they were plastic roses. But the memory of seeing a rose and being close to it triggered the whole reaction. So it was the mind that furnished the chemistry. You see, I mean, it wasn't the true allergy in that case. It was the memory of the allergy. So we'll talk about all those kind of fun, fascinating things. So back to this, and then today we're going to talk about, again, these nutritional deficiencies and neurotransmitter imbalances, part 2. Remember that all nutrient and neurotransmitter deficiencies have to do with communication cell to cell. If you can't communicate messages, just like inside the family or inside the office or inside the orchestra, for Jeanette, if somebody hides the conductor, the band's not going to play as well as if they can see him. It's going to fall apart. Okay, that's even better. And the body falls apart when the neurotransmitters can't conduct the chemical orchestra that goes on. So we look at the major categories of deficiencies. It's fats. Omega-3s, there's actually 3. Fats, the omega-3s, and the omega-6s. Those are called essential fatty acids. The body cannot make them. We need to get them in our diet. So we need a certain amount of these fish oils, safflower oils, vegetable oils. We need olive oils, omega-9s. So fats are something we have to take in the diet. The second is neurotransmitters like serotonin, GABA, acetylcholine for memory, dopamine for mood, epinephrine for energy, norepinephrine for focus. ADD is a deficiency of norepinephrine and dopamine. Serotonin, remember all the neurotransmitters are made from amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. That's why eating high protein foods is so important. If you don't get enough tryptophan, you're going to be deficient in serotonin. And if you don't have enough serotonin, you're going to be depressed. You're going to run into problems with sleep because melatonin is formed from serotonin, etc. And then the final area of deficiency here is vitamins and minerals. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss vitamins and minerals, especially the B vitamins, magnesium, selenium, and zinc. Hi, I have your sister online. Okay, so let's review briefly on fats. The question is, do you need an oil change? Remember, omega-3 fats are highly anti-inflammatory. They're critical to all our cells. Our cells in the brain, for example, can only function as well as our membranes have omega-3 fatty acids in them, okay? They have omega-6s too, but we need, omega-3s are the things that make cell membranes fluid. Do you remember that video we watched on the fluidity of the cell, how proteins move within the cell wall? If we have too many saturated fats, think of what saturated fats do when you put them in the fridge. They're solid. The membrane becomes solid, and all these neurotransmitters that need to reach out. It would be as if you were trying to communicate with someone and you couldn't move. You could only, the movement of the cell depends on these omega-3s. And again, EPA is the eicosapentaenoic in the fish oil, and DHA, which makes up 60% of our brain. The omega-6 fat are pro-inflammatory, but we need inflammation at times too. It's the balance. So the normal balance of omega-6 to omega-3 should be about 1:1 to 3:1, and now it's 10 or 20 to 1. Why? Because all the processed foods that we have available to us, were made by safflower and corn oils that were government subsidized. They're made very inexpensive, and they're so cheap that the way the free market drives it is they're the easiest ones to use in preparing all the packaged cakes, breads, crackers, you know, all the things. And so we're really overwhelmed with omega-6s, and that's why inflammation is such a problem today. Remember, the neurotransmitters are the molecules of communication, and they're all made from amino acids right here. If you don't eat enough protein, if you're deficient in amino acids or not absorbing protein well, you're going to end up being much more likely to be depressed, to have poor focus, poor energy. You need serotonin for the antidepressant effect. You need epinephrine for energy, dopamine for pleasure and reward, GABA to calm down and relax. So all these things require amino acids. So we always look, are there deficiencies in our amino acids and neurotransmitters? And in fact, most of psychiatry, and this is, most people don't understand it, but most of psychopharmacology, the pharmacological drugs used to treat depression and ADD and autism and all the neurological spectrum disorders, all those drugs in some way mimic or increase the effect of our natural neurotransmitters. So serotonin, the happy mood molecule, what does Prozac do? It increases the amount of active serotonin in the brain, in the synapses between the cells. So there's more communication of happiness. Okay? But if you don't have serotonin, Prozac doesn't work. In fact, we know people have low serotonin levels don't respond to Prozac or any of the antidepressants. The problem is, to get an accurate serotonin level, you have to draw cerebrospinal fluid in an LP, a lumbar tap, a spinal tap. Well, nobody goes around doing spinal taps to find, you know. So you can estimate from urine tests, and you can estimate from metabolites of serotonin, like 5-hydroxyindolacetic acid. Are you making that? If you're making that, then there's probably enough serotonin turnover. So we try and figure these things out. Norepinephrine, focus and energy. What's the #1 ADD drug? Ritalin. Ritalin increases the amount of norepinephrine, and it also helps with the dopamine, focus and attention. Acetylcholine, almost all the Alzheimer's drugs help to increase. What they do is they slow down the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. So when acetylcholine is formed from the foods we eat, there's an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase that breaks it down and metabolizes it. So almost all the drugs for dementia or Alzheimer's slow down that acetylcholinesterase enzyme so it leaves more acetylcholine. But we can improve acetylcholine through our diet, through eating choline. I mean, you can get choline, which is in lecithin, which is in eggs. You can take phosphatidylcholine supplements, phosphatidylserine supplements. So there are ways through our diet to. So what we want to do is maximize make sure the body has the raw materials to make enough, and then use these other drugs when needed to slow down the breakdown. So the old school is, let's artificially boost these molecules through drugs to improve the depression, anxiety, and attention deficit. And the new paradigm is, let's do that. Let's use the best of modern pharmacology and neuropharmacology, but let's ask the question, why are these neurotransmitters too low or too high? And to do that, you have to look at the diet. You have to look at the absorption. Is the gut absorbing proteins? Because remember, every neurotransmitter is made from an amino acid. Tyrosine is made into dopamine, and then norepinephrine, and then epinephrine. Tryptophan is made into serotonin. Choline and an acetyl group from certain foods we eat is made into acetylcholine. So we have to have the nutrients, and nobody looks at that. We just say, well, let's give a drug that boosts these things. But why not make sure we're actually absorbing the right amount of protein? And we do that through those NutriVal testing and the functional medicine testing. So we're off to our topic for today, vitamins and minerals. So we go start with the question, true or false, if you eat right, you don't need a multivitamin or multi-mineral tablet. How many think that's true? Okay, how many think that's false? How many don't know? Okay,
I don't know.
it's true,
Oh, it is.
but, and it's a big but, and I'll read the but from Dr. Hyman, who's sort of one of the pioneers in functional medicine. But eating right means eating wild, fresh, whole, organic, local, non-genetically modified food grown in virgin mineral and nutrient-rich soils and not transported across vast distances like grapes from Chile and whatever other beautiful fruits we have all year round, and stored for months before being eaten. In other words, in today's world, everybody needs a multivitamin. So unless you're literally living off the ground and you have an organic farm and you're doing it all right, we do need multivitamins. Why do we need them? Because our food supply is so processed, it's stripped of essential vitamins and minerals. More than 92% of Americans are deficient in one or more vitamins. The American Journal of Public Health researchers found that 6% tested serious vitamin C deficiency and 30% were borderline low. The Journal of Pediatrics found that obesity and malnutrition often coexist. I know this is hard to believe, but it's true. You can get a lot of empty calories, we call them, right? They're foods that are high in caloric content, but they just don't have the vitamins and the minerals. Take most white rices, white breads. I mean, they put some things in and nutritionally fortify it, but essentially most of the good stuff's gone. That's why we want whole grain everything if possible. A USDA survey showed 37% of Americans don't get enough vitamin C, 70% don't get enough vitamin E, almost 75% not enough zinc, and 40% not enough iron. And I can tell you from the testing we do here, with the stress levels today and the rapid pace of our society, almost everybody's deficient in the B vitamins, which get burnt up really quickly in stress. Why? Because they make glutathione, which helps prevent oxidative stress, and they make SAMe, which is the natural antidepressant, which we need to function in today's world, or we'd all be depressed. So what are the symptoms of vitamin and mineral deficiencies? Let's talk about vitamin D, because a lot of you tested really low at first. We've had people with a level of 8. On vitamin D, a level less than 10 is rickets. In kids, in adults, it's osteomalacia. So if these were kids not getting enough vitamin D, their bones would grow up bow-legged. Look at the inside of that bone, how porous it is. It's not solid. Look how thin the cortex is compared to a healthy bone. So this is what happens in rickets. In adults, we call low vitamin D osteomalacia. Because the bones are already formed, they just get soft. But there's a tremendous amount of vitamin D deficiency. We'll talk about vitamin D later. But you look at some of the symptoms of vitamin and mineral deficiencies in the extreme. Bleeding gums, teeth falling out, rickets, blindness, insanity. I've met a few of those people. Yeah, they're walking around, dementia, scaly skin, diabetes, depression, heart disease. So, of course, nutrients are the stuff of life. We see in plants, that's why eating high phytonutrients, getting our plants from organic soils when possible, wild if possible. There's a lot of fruits you can get that are in the wild and are harvested wild. That's even better than organic in most cases, because when plants and fruits have to compete in the wild against Mother Nature, they develop all these compounds and what we call phytonutrients in the skin mostly that help protect them against Mother Nature from destroying them. Well, the deal with Mother Nature is when we eat those fruits and vegetables, we get that phytonutrient protection. We get the anti-cancer, antifungal, antiviral. That's, of course, why so many compounds that become chemotherapy agents or are used in treatment of cancer are derived from plants and fruits found in the rainforest or wherever. So without nutrients, the functions of virtually every cell in your body shuts down, and we'll talk about that in great depth. The essential vitamins and nutrients that we cannot form in our body itself. Like, for instance, we have to take vitamin C in. Our bodies cannot produce vitamin C, whereas animals can. Dogs can make their own vitamin C. So they don't need to take in vitamin C, but we can't. So you see ours are A, D, E, K. Those are the fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin C, almost all the B vitamins, biotin, choline, and again, these will show some of the sources of these, inositol and the carotenoids, which are in carrots, and that's where carrot comes from, carotenoid pigments. And there are conditionally essential nutrients, things our body can make, but under stress, it might need more of the precursors, more of the foods that have them in it to make sure it can keep up with the demand. So the paradigm in deficiencies is this. We used to think, and the old model was the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance. It doesn't work because it's a population-based amount that says if you get 50 milligrams of vitamin C, I don't know what the exact amount is, you won't get scurvy. Well, what we realize is there's a big difference between preventing a deficiency disease like rickets and scurvy and optimizing health, right? So having enough of a nutrient to prevent a deficiency is a far cry from having enough to optimize cellular function. So the old model says provide the minimum to prevent the deficiency, and this is where you get the old doctors who haven't picked up a book in 30 years and say, you get everything from food. You're throwing your pee and your vitamins away because it turns bright yellow, and you go to the bathroom and you're wasting your money. It's not true. The new model says provide the correct amount to optimize the functioning in every cell. Now, why is this important? Why does it happen? We have, in the human genome, there are approximately 30,000 genes. And remember, each gene is a segment of DNA that codes for a single protein. And those proteins can be an enzyme that makes certain things happen. An enzyme is like a party planner. Basically, it goes around and it hooks you up with you, and it introduces you to you, and it makes sure you get together, and if you have something to talk about, it gets done. Enzymes help catalyze reactions, very much like somebody bringing people together, and nothing happens to the enzyme itself, so it's not changed in that reaction. So I can introduce Chuck to Madeline, and they can have a great conversation, and I leave and I'm still the same, and then I can go do that to someone else. That's what enzymes do. However, there are close to 1.5 to 3 million subtle variations in our genes that produces different forms of enzymes. So you may have an enzyme that is let's say an enzyme called hydroxylase. That may work at 100% in you, but you may have a variant of that hydroxylase enzyme that only does 50% of what it should do. And you may have a variant that does just 20%. So there are variations in the genes that affect which enzyme your body will make. And it makes you uniquely you. In fact, about a third of these enzymes are related to how minerals, which we're going to talk about today, affect chemical reactions in the body. So this was Roger Williams. He's right here on my left. Your left too. See, I'm not so sharp after 6. And then his good buddy here, I showed you this picture before, but that's Linus Pauling, who developed vitamin C. Well, Roger Williams was discoverer of vitamin B5, pantothenic acid, and he developed this concept. And I think I told you the story. When I was a teenager, I found a book by him. I didn't know I was going to be a doctor. I just liked to read about science and Isaac Asimov and science fiction and whatever. And I read this book by Roger Williams. He talked about biochemical individuality. And he said, one day, we're not going to treat everybody the same. We're going to do a special testing and blood tests and genetic tests and whatever, and we're going to figure out the exact nutrients that your body needs to be optimally functioning. And that day is here. And that field of medicine is now called functional medicine. We can pretty much do that today. So, a great debt is owed to, these giants like Roger Williams and Linus Pauling who figured all this stuff out. But remember, enzymes are proteins created by your DNA. Think of them like those sort of party planners and, socialites that help keep the party going. And the catalyst, the enzymes are catalysts that slow down or speed up trillions of chemical reactions. And the important part for tonight's talk is that nutrients like vitamins and minerals control the functioning of these enzymes. In other words, these proteins, if we don't have the right minerals and vitamins for them to bind with, they can't do their job. So that's why vitamins and minerals are so important. So I drew out this reaction that we've studied before, how homocysteine goes into methionine and then gets converted into SAMe, the body's natural antidepressant. So methionine synthase is an enzyme, and it catalyzes the conversion of homocysteine into this intermediate methionine. Don't get bogged down with it. I just want you to get the concepts. The idea is that this enzyme is a protein, and if B12 is not around and folic acid is not around, this enzyme cannot work efficiently. So what's the end result? We end up with a lot of homocysteine building up because it can't be converted into SAMe. Now, we could also end up with a lot of methionine because this second enzyme is necessary to convert methionine into SAMe, and it does it with the help of magnesium. So the point being that even though you take in enough protein, you may have plenty of neurotransmitters or plenty of amino acids to make these enzymes. If you're missing the vitamins that help those enzymes to do their job, you're not much better off than if you didn't have the protein to even make the enzyme. So here is, and remember I said down here, you look, about a third of your variations in the gene are solely dedicated to determining how effectively your enzymes are controlled by the nutrients you consume. So what this means is, you remember a long time ago, I think it was our very first talk, we talked about nutrigenomics. We talked about how does food influence your genes. And what we've realized is food has two things. It has energy, calories, so that you have fuel and ATP to do what you want to do, to be alert, and it has information. Food is energy and information. And the information are the phytonutrients and those compounds in food that actually go to these enzymes and tell them what to do. And they also go to the DNA and tell the DNA which proteins to make. So food and nutrigenomics, so not only do the minerals and the vitamins we eat tell the enzymes what to do, but they also dramatically influence which parts of our genetic material produce which proteins. So it may, if you eat, let's say, lots of saturated fats, those omega-6s then, through a series of reactions, influence the genetic structure, and pro-inflammatory genes produce proteins that create inflammation. Whereas if you eat a lot of omega-3s, those can go into the nucleus of the cell and basically trigger the DNA to make lots of anti-inflammatories. It's basically your own Motrin factory. Anti-inflammatories are Motrin or cortisone. So the foods we eat can heavily influence what our DNA does. So we talked about the biochemical individuality and why the RDA just doesn't make sense, because it's different for every individual based on your unique genetics. Now, Bruce Ames is he's a professor at Berkeley, a giant in the field, and he did a landmark study on over 50 enzymes that are controlled by nutrients. And look what he says here. Our analysis of metabolic disease that affects cofactor binding, that means minerals and vitamins binding to the enzyme, particularly as a result of polymorphic mutations, that's those SNPs, those genetic variations. So our analysis of metabolic disease may present a novel rationale for high-dose vitamin therapy, perhaps hundreds of times the normal dietary reference intake or recommended dietary allowance in some cases. Now, we don't recommend, we went through that in the 70s, in 80s and 90s, these mega doses of vitamins. We don't recommend that anymore. But what we're saying, in some cases, certain individuals, based on these variations in their genes, may need 5 to 10 times as much of a nutrient as somebody else that doesn't have that variation. So another concept is that a single nutrient like magnesium or B6 can catalyze hundreds of different reactions. And it's this reason that suboptimal levels of even a single nutrient can adversely affect hundreds of reactions in the body. So for instance, magnesium here plays a role in over 300 enzyme reactions, and zinc plays a role in even more. So remember, this is kind of a visual of what we talked about. Excuse me. There's a deficiency state over here, and a little vitamin D will prevent rickets, but a little more will prevent osteoporosis, and a little more heart disease, and a little more will prevent depression, and optimal protection can prevent colon cancer and some other forms of cancer. So we want to get that vitamin D level up into the optimal range, which we know to be 50 to 80, not 30. And remember, under 10 is rickets. So briefly, I want to review this again. The B vitamins, we talk about this homocysteine reaction and why they're so important. I lost my cursor here. There we go. Homocysteine here, this portion that takes homocysteine into SAMe is called methylation. This part of the reaction that takes homocysteine into glutathione is called the sulfation train. So we've got two trains basically that are necessary and need to run on their tracks, and that's the sulfation and the methylation. The sulfation because it makes this antioxidant enzyme and detoxifier, and the methylation that creates the SAMe. These vitamins carry the methyl groups, so B12 and B9 are like the cars on the track. They carry the methyl groups. Inside that car is the methyl group, which is a carbon and 3 hydrogen, and it delivers it to methionine so that it can become SAMe, or it delivers to homocysteine so it can become methionine. So in other words, we need methyl groups, which come from a chemical in that cardio B that we use called trimethylglycine. It's also called betaine, and it has 3 methyl groups in every molecule. And we need sulfur groups, and sulfur in the diet comes from the cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, things like that. And the body needs these, and you can see the actual complicated version is much more complicated, and even this is a dramatic simplification of the chemistry, which I don't pretend to understand, but it's complicated. So the fact that we've gotten to this part is quite amazing. Now, let's talk about one of those common SNPs that happen in about 20% of the population. It's called the MTHFR gene, methylene tetrahydrofolic reductase. It's a big word. It means when you eat folic acid through foods or through a vitamin, it needs to be converted into an active form. And that active form is called 5-methylene tetrahydrofolate. If you have this gene, and it's the MTHFR gene that converts folate into this. Well, it converts a byproduct of folate into this, but essentially, if this gene is there, and if you have the variation, it lowers the ability to do that. So, in other words, your gene, if you have the MTHFR gene, your version of that enzyme may only convert 20% of folic acid into its active form. So you could take in 5 times as much folic acid and still be deficient. Do you understand? It's a genetic defect. You can get a homozygous defect where you get one of the variants from each parent, in which case that enzyme may work at 20 or 30 or 40%, or you can get a heterozygous where it may work at 60 or 70%. But the point being that, remember, there are so many of these genetic variations, we have to find out which ones are in you and me so that we can counteract these things. And one of the hints may be that a high homocysteine level means somehow you don't have enough folic acid around. Now, we can actually measure this gene, and we do it directly now. We can do it through LabCorp. We just send the blood off, and we can say, yeah, you have it or you don't. And if you have it, we know you're going to need high doses of B vitamins and probably like a methylation, like a betaine or trimethylglycine for life. You're just going to need, or you can take SAMe. SAMe is you know, we talk about SAMe as that natural antidepressant. Don't forget the amazing thing is you can buy this at Costco. You know, SAMe, S-adenosyl-methionine, is sold at Costco. It's very expensive, but if you can bypass the defect by just taking SAMe. So we recommend for a lot of people who have more serious conditions like cancer or, you know, maybe mental disorder of some kind, that they just get on SAMe. We still give them lots of B vitamins so they produce their own, but we can bypass these defects. That's the other important thing to remember is if you have this defect, this MTHFR gene, we now make the active form of folic acid. So if you have the defect, instead of giving you plain folic acid, which is in our Cardio B, it's one of the reasons I switched to the MethylGuard Plus, because it has the active form. So if you have this defect, I can bypass it. It's like if there's a crash at Barranca and Jeffrey, I can just take Creek over to Alton and go around it. That's what we can do with the 5-methyltetrahydrofolate. We can give you the active form of folate. So these are the little tricks that when you realize that people may have these defects that we can bypass and go around. Let's just give you some of the brief studies, and I'll move pretty quickly through most of this. But it's pretty amazing when you see, because now that you know SAMe is a natural antidepressant, look at the overwhelming evidence that links low folate, B12, and B6 to depression. Here's a study in the Journal of Nutrition in 2007, 2,682 middle-aged men in Finland. Those with the lowest dietary folate intake had a 67% greater risk for depression. Look down here in the American Journal of Psychiatry in 2000, found that 27% of severely depressed women over 65 were B12 deficient. Now, why would that happen? We haven't talked about the metabolism of B12, but B12, when you take it in the food or a supplement or in your diet, it goes into the stomach. It requires acid and something called intrinsic factor that is made in the stomach. Intrinsic factor binds to the B12, and those two together go through the small intestine, and then in the last portion of the small intestine called the ileum, the B12 and the intrinsic factor are absorbed into the system. So it's a long process from eating the B12. It has to bind to intrinsic factor, which requires acid, which then goes to the ileum and gets absorbed. As we age, most of us lose the acid in our stomach. Or a lot of people are taking proton pump inhibitors or Zantac all the time or antacids. They don't have the acid. Intrinsic factor isn't released or made as quickly as we age as well. So that intrinsic factor isn't there. It can't bind the B12. It can't get absorbed. So you could be taking tons of B12 in your diet, eating it great, and still be susceptible to depression. So look what happened in this test. And again, the B12 deficiency in this case was measured by the methylmalonic acid. Remember, you asked me, how do we differentiate homocysteine? Is it B6, B12? Well, the methylmalonic acid. And we can, again, bypass intrinsic factor two ways. We now have a sublingual B12 where you just suck on it. You put it under your tongue. It gets absorbed right into the bloodstream, doesn't need intrinsic factor. Bypasses the GI tract. Or we give injections, B12 injections. This is very, in a way enlightening, because when I grew up in medicine, in my early days in medicine, when did I start medical school? 81, when you saw a doctor giving B12 shots, you go, oh, it's a placebo, it's hocus pocus, right? Yet, if you ask the patients, they all loved it. They said, Doc, I feel better after. It gives me energy, I feel more alert, and they would come in all the time, once a month for their B12 shots. But it kind of got a bad name. Well, its name is good again because the clinician was right. But doctors used to listen to their patients back then, and now they don't because they have 5 minutes to see you before the HMO says you better go on to the next patient. So look, what this study kind of suggests is that nearly a fourth of all severe depression could be cured with vitamin B12 shots. Let's go to another fascinating finding. People with the low folic acid have a 7% response to treatment with antidepressants. But those with a high folic acid have a 44% response to treatment. Again, why? Because all these B vitamins are necessary to keep the reactions in the cell functioning well, to keep the glutathione going, to keep the SAMe being made. Now, even more interesting is, look, our MethylGuard Plus has 1 milligram of active folate in it. So what did the pharmaceutical companies do? Well, they don't want to be left out. They came out with a form called Deplin that's now a prescription folic acid that has 7.5 milligrams of folic acid, or 15 very high doses of folic acid. You'd have to take 7 or 8 MethylGuard Plus capsules to get that much folic acid. Now, obviously, if your levels are built up on a regular basis and you're taking these vitamins, it's great. You don't need it. But it's interesting how everyone wants in on it now, right? So now we have forms that are pharmaceutical. Let me give you a case study from Dr. Hyman about this guy, Joe, 51-year-old, who ran around with a dark cloud of depression over him, diagnosed with bipolar. He was on multiple mood stabilizers, and even on all of the above, he said depression stole his life. He could not get out of bed, work or focus well, and no energy, and the marriage was, going down the tubes. He had gained 50 pounds from his medicines, developed high blood pressure and high cholesterol, and had poor sleep habits. Well, we did functional medicine testing like the Nutrival and methylmalonic acid and some of these. It revealed low testosterone, low serotonin, low dopamine. Let's go over these again. TAC number 1, right? Low testosterone. TAC number 2, low serotonin. TAC number 3, low dopamine. Dairy allergies, low omega-3 fats, and severe B12, folate, and B6 deficiency. So it's not a simple process, but after a period of time, cleaning up his diet, bioidentical testosterone replacement, an oil change with omega-3 fatty acids, fixing the allergies by avoiding the foods that he was allergic to, and high doses of B6, B12, after about a year, got his life back, got back in order. Now, I can tell you what normally would happen without functional medicine testing. He'd end up with, electric, ECT treatment or some other form of, where do you go when you're already on lithium, Depakote, Abilify, Zyprexa, Clozaril, Lamictal, Neurontin, or committed suicide? Yeah, we could easily lose him well before that. You're absolutely right. So this is the beauty of really, remember, functional medicine, we treat the causes of disease. We don't treat the name of the disease. Because depression in him is completely different than depression in someone else. And we didn't even take into account the psychological stresses that we'll talk about next month. Dimension and methyl movers. The risk of getting Alzheimer's increased 60% in people deficient in folate. And a double-blind placebo study of elderly with memory complaints showed 15 milligrams of folate a day. Now you're going to have to be on the prescription strength at that point, or some injectable form if there is, showed significant improvement of memory. But you never hear about these things, right? You just see the drug ads on TV. Because, there's no money to be made in selling folate or B12 or any of this stuff. A 10-year study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that those over 65, that low B12 was associated with a more rapid of cognitive decline. So another case study from Hyman's book, Ultramind, Eleanor over here, a 72-year-old with progressive decline in memory and mood. She was on acid reflux medicine, so prevents the B12 absorption, as does age itself with the lower acid. And testing showed severe B12 deficiency. Her methylation train had fallen off the tracks, basically. Couldn't deliver the methyl groups to the methionine to make the SAMe. So they gave her B12 shots of the methyl B12, active folic acid, and it improved her memory, mood, and energy within a fairly short period of time. These things work pretty quickly. I mean, 3-6 months if it's just a single problem, Methylation and ADHD and autism. Dr. Richard Death of Northeastern discovered that brain receptors for dopamine require methyl groups. to work. Now we're talking about a receptor in the cell wall. Remember we talked about how proteins float in that cell wall. A dopamine receptor is looking for a molecule of dopamine that when it binds to it would create a feeling of pleasure and reward and satisfaction. For that receptor to even be open to receiving the dopamine molecule, it needs methyl groups. It needs to be methylated. So even the protein needs the methyl group to be open to receive. It would be like those old cell phones where you need to flip it open first before you can even talk to somebody. So it needs the B vitamins just to flip open and be able to talk, and then you have to have someone on the other line to talk to. So to be turned on, these dopamine receptors need B12 to activate specific enzymes that open it up. And other toxins like mercury will inhibit some of the enzymes. So shots of methyl B12 often have powerfully beneficial effects in children with autism. Briefly on vitamin D, it affects over half the population. It's linked to depression, dementia, cancer, MS, fibromyalgia, high blood pressure, heart disease. Again, when it's linked to it, it's not the cause, but it may be a contributing cause. So we always want to make sure that we measure the B12 levels. And you can see here a study of elderly patients showed the average was 18. Remember, less than 10 is rickets. We want to be about 50 to 80. That's our goal. Vitamin D levels drop in the winter and are associated with depression, SAD. It's called seasonal affective disorder, and that can be alleviated many times by giving vitamin D supplements. This is a great picture. The best way to get your vitamin D is from the sunshine. It's said at about 20 minutes of sun at midday is the equivalent to about 10 to 15,000 international units of vitamin D with open exposure to like arms and upper body or upper part of your chest. So, it's a lot of vitamin D. I mean, you know, those capsules we have are 5,000, and so you figure 5,000 about 5 minutes in the sun. So in most people's levels in the summer, if they're out in the sun, but we wear sunscreen, that blocks vitamin D. So, well, there's a difference in, it's always safe in the sun because it won't overproduce, whereas if you take it in with the supplement, you can get too much. So you want to be careful, yeah. And this is fascinating. A review article in the archives found that proper vitamin D led to a reduction in death from all causes by 7%. So there's, you know, that would be headline news. If you found a drug that reduced all causes of death by 7%, it would be headline news. But, you know, it's sunshine vitamin. Magnificent magnesium, the relaxer, one of 18 essential minerals. Those deficient in magnesium are twice as likely to die because magnesium stabilizes cell membranes, heart rhythms. It's the relaxing. If you feel uptight, muscle spasms, muscle cramps, anxiety, asthma, tightness, anything that's tight, you may be magnesium deficient, and that's a great way to get plenty of magnesium. Measure your levels. You have to measure them inside the red blood cell, not inside the serum. So you have to ask for a specific test from your doctor called the RBC magnesium. If you're low, you want to supplement. Even if you're normal in the cell, you still might benefit by supplementing because, remember, there are 300 enzymatic reactions that depend on magnesium. So Dr. Hyman calls magnesium one of his secret weapons against illness, particularly anxiety, insomnia, ADHD, and autism. It is the stress antidote and the most powerful relaxation mineral that exists. Chronic stress decreases magnesium levels. A study in Kosovo found that chronic war stress caused large amount of magnesium to be lost in the urine. Beans, greens, nuts, seaweed, and supplements. So another case study, a 36-year-old doctor who suffered from severe migraines, got minimal relief from narcotics and migraine medications. She also had panic attacks, anxiety, insomnia, palpitation, muscle cramps, constipation. Those are all magnesium related, tightness, constipation, you know. Testing revealed severely reduced levels of magnesium And here's a case like, remember Dr. Ames said sometimes we need mega doses of vitamins. She required nearly 10 times the usual amount of magnesium, which is a lot, to normalize her body, and then she actually improved very, very quickly. I think this is our last mineral, zinc. I couldn't think of a title, so I said you'll sink without zinc. And so it's stupid, but you know, I was up late and I wanted something that rhymed. Okay, there's a global zinc deficiency. Greater than 1/3 of the world population is zinc deficient. It's used by more enzymes than any other mineral. We've all heard of zinc in relation to, right, zinc lozenges for colds and sore throats. Zinc helps your DNA repair, protein synthesis, critical for immunity. So we know in colds and upper respiratory infections, it controls inflammation, and it also helps activate your digestive enzymes. It's also used, zinc is used in a very complicated protein here called metallothionein, which is a detoxifier. It's found mostly in the kidney and the brain and in the memory centers of the brain. And metallothionein is a zinc-dependent enzyme. You see all the zinc molecules that are in a molecule of metallothionein. And this helps detoxify certain heavy metals so your body can flush them out the urine. Zinc deficiency is also needed for the enzyme dopamine hydroxylase. Zinc helps that enzyme convert norepinephrine to make norepinephrine from dopamine. So dopamine needs the enzyme dopamine hydroxylase to make norepinephrine. And remember, norepinephrine is a major antidepressant just like serotonin is. So there are SNRIs like Effexor that are selective norepinephrine serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So it works on serotonin and norepinephrine. So zinc has a place, just like an SNRI, in helping to reduce depression. Oh, this is the last one. Sorry, selenium. Zinc, where do we get zinc from? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. I mean, if you're deficient, which when we measure, we give it in supplements. It's in almost every multivitamin, but it's in most greens. Most of these things are in vegetables, fruits. I mean, mainly vegetables, I would think, is where the zinc is. But I'll have to look it up exactly. I don't know. That's why I work very closely with nutritionists. The last is selenium, and selenium is necessary to make thyroid hormone. It's a major detoxifier. In order for your body to make glutathione, I think I have the reaction. No, I didn't put it here, but on that complicated reaction when homocysteine goes to cystothionine, which then goes to glutathione, selenium's involved in that production of glutathione. So selenium's necessary for that. Selenium also is necessary to help your body make some fatty acids that help the nerve cell sheath grow, the myelin sheath. And it also studies that show that it boosts mood. It's in almost every multivitamin and mineral tablet. So, but it becomes very important with people with thyroid disease that aren't making enough thyroid because selenium's often deficient. Just to close out here, remember our Michael Jordan phenomenon. No one of these minerals or vitamins alone can do the job. The Michael Jordan phenomenon is that if you put Michael Jordan, a great ball player, on the court against any team in the NBA alone, he'll lose, right? You can have the greatest single vitamin in the world. You can take the most amount of folate in the world. But you need all the other vitamins. You need the B12. You need the selenium. You need the zinc. So it's a team approach. It's a team sport. No compound, no mineral, no single fatty acid alone will solve the problem. We usually need to do multiple to look at the big picture. And remember this strategy of neuroprotection. This happens to me all the time. I forgot to make a backup copy of my brain, so everything I learned last semester was lost. We could change that to yesterday or sometimes this morning or whatever, but you know what I mean. So Dr. Cummings at UCLA says we focus on prevention and detoxification as deliberate strategies to protect our nerves and brain. Remember, this therapeutic nihilism, traditionally implied in the term degenerative, is giving way to functional medicine, which says, let's look at the molecular events going on inside the cell that lead to cellular destruction. So instead of saying, remember I've talked often about my patient has the Parkinson's, but he has mercury toxicity and some other deficiencies, and nobody talked to him about that. They said, well, let's put you on a drug for Parkinson's. There's nothing we can do. Let's just hope it doesn't get worse. That's what we call therapeutic nihilism, or MS, or any of these degenerative disorders. We have to at least make an effort to look at what have been the cumulative causes or deficiencies that have led to the cell damage or the death of the mitochondria that leads to the loss of cells in that area that cause this symptom, you know, this complex called Parkinson's or MS or whatever. So it's always the genes mixed with the environment, the diet and stuff like that, and the choices we make. We'll talk about the choices in the foods we eat, the lifestyle we live, our exposure to certain toxic situations, toxic metals, toxic environments, etc. But nutrients are a key player in affecting our genes and the environment and the choices we make. And then finally, every time he lectures about serotonin, he puts me to sleep. I hope you all had a restful night, and we're gonna end it there. So, any questions or thoughts or yes? Right.
And then we do stuff something like depression and injection. Does that mean over injection?
Yeah. In the particular study I was talking, or case study that I was referring to, what we said it suggested that injections alone would solve the problem because it would bypass the intrinsic factor in the gut and the malabsorption problems. But probably the sublingual form would work. It might need a little more to get it in there. The injection is probably the best way. And there are new forms there are even patches now, skin patches with high doses of the B vitamins that get absorbed that way, and there's some proponents of that. But what we're finding out is, yeah, either any method, probably the least effective method as we age is just taking a B12 pill, you know, in a multivitamin or a capsule. I mean, it does work in most people. I have to say, we've treated a lot of people here, and their levels go down. Their homocysteine levels go dramatically down. But if we're having trouble getting them to the level we want, which is under 9, we'll definitely add in sublingual or the patches, or the injectables are great. You know, it's just you have to come into the doctor. Some people can be taught to do it themselves, but it's, you know, it's not easy. But it's a great question, yeah. You're always in good shape with the injectable or the sublingual form.
Now the MethylGuard?
MethylGuard Plus.
Does it have only the Bs? Does it have folate in there too?
Yeah, MethylGuard has the big 3. It has the active form of folic acid, which is 5-methyltetrahydrofolate. It has the active form of vitamin B6. So B6 is another vitamin, pyridoxine, that needs to be transformed by an enzyme into pyridoxal 5-phosphate. If that enzyme's defective, you can't convert it. So MethylGuard Plus has the active form of pyridoxine too, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, and it has the active form of B12, which is methylcobalamin. What most doctors give in their office is cyanocobalamin. It's a cyanide molecule, believe it or not, attached to the cobalamin, which is the B12, because that was the form that people made for years, but it's cheaper and it's less expensive. But the methylcobalamin gives you the methyl group, and it's the active form, so it's ready to go to work. So methylcobalamin is in the MethylGuard Plus, and that's the benefit over the Cardio B, which does have methyl B12 methylcobalamin, but it only has pyridoxine, the non-active form of B6, and it has the non-active form of folic acid. Now, most people convert. Most people don't have the enzymatic defect, but you don't know. And it could be up to 20% that do or more, so why take the chance?
And the magnesium so important for
Right.
so many things. Is that tested normally?
No, it's not normally tested. It's amazing how it's infrequently it's tested.
Do you test it?
Yeah, we test it here, not routinely for every physical, but if you would come in with symptoms of, nutritional disorders or tightness or anything related to magnesium, look, magnesium alone in very high doses, in probably 40% of people will lower their blood pressure to acceptable levels. Because magnesium is necessary to relax the blood vessel, relax the bronchial tube, relax the colon, relax,
That could replace a lot of high blood pressure.
Well, it could. There's a book called What Your Doctor Won't Tell You About High Blood Pressure, or one of these kind of written by a brilliant, I can't remember which university he went to, but one of the brilliant doctors at that, who says, listen, the mainstay of non-pharmacological treatment for high blood pressure is magnesium. Now, I tell you, magnesium's a very dense chemical. In other words, it needs a lot of powder to get a little of magnesium. So to get the doses you need, which are, 500 to 800 milligrams a day, it would be like 6 capsules a day. It's hard to get, you give people the option of 1 atenolol versus 6 magnesium a day, the compliance level goes down, but, Yeah, a prescription blood pressure medicine. I'm sorry, I'm just throwing on, or it could be, low tensin or whatever blood pressure medicine. They're usually once a day. So there are, and the most important thing is to get the pressure down. So I'd rather you take low tensin once a day and keep your pressure down than not take your magnesium and have high blood pressure but do it naturally, Any other questions? Yeah, B12 is the one big deficit in vegetarians. Yeah, almost every vegetarian should be on B12 supplements. Oh, with B12?
No, if you're not 100% vegetarian, you have a little bit of meat, you get B12
No, the B12 is not. Look, in our meat eaters, it's a lot of people are deficient in B12. Yeah, no, B12 is it's a common deficiency. Yeah, so I think a lot of people, and again, remember, as we age, and everyone in this room, where none of us are, me and you, none of us are, our intrinsic factor isn't working as well. We don't make as much acid. We don't absorb as much. So it gets harder and harder for us to get those nutrients. So the sublingual forms are great. And they taste delicious too.
Do they have sublingual magnesium?
No, because remember, it's a big, the mineral takes up a lot of space. So the powder, it's just, you couldn't tolerate and the end point of too much magnesium is diarrhea.
Yeah.
So.
The IBS is constipation.
No, it's an absolutely great thing for IBS-C, constipated, IBS, absolutely.
When you're lucky, you don't need any of it.
And when you're lucky, you don't need any of it. Amen to that. Well, listen, thank you, everybody. We appreciate it. And